We're good. Tonight we're going to discuss what? Subject?
The first marital
Marital discord, marital disagreement. Okay, I'm sure everyone Googled when you saw the topic right away. Everyone quickly Googled. What is Rabbi talking about? What do you come up with? Who was the subjects of the first marital disagreement?
Sarah, because it's cautious.
Oh, you didn't. You mean you didn't look it up?
We're reading the cautious.
Abraham and Sarah. Okay, what did you want to say, Miriam?
figures, it kind of figures.
About this last thing, she was guessing, Adam and Eve,
Where'd they have a disagreement recorded?
didn't they?
I'm sure they got into disagreement. I just don't know where it's recorded.
No, oh, that's right, she said it, although that's not in the Bible, she said.
I got to be recorded in the Bible we're talking about. Okay. What we're going to talk about today really is a Jewish perspective on running a Jewish home. And I share this with everyone from the following introduction. We're talking about here the ideal Jewish home. Not necessarily what you have, but the way it ideally should be. And we're going to see from the story of Avram and Sarah how we look to set up a healthy, functioning Jewish home. And primarily, a functioning Jewish home has three different energies. There is the masculine energy, the feminine energy, and then there is we'll call it the children's energy. And these three come together to create a healthy Jewish home. So whenever you have different energies under the same roof, we have to figure out how we can properly divide responsibilities. And if we can figure that out, then we can set up a good functioning Jewish home. So that's what we're going to talk about today. This was background to where we're going to get into, and we'll see how we're going to navigate and end up in hopefully a very good place, or certainly a better place than when we begin. In the parsha that we read this week, Parshas Vayera, so it's really somewhat of a continuation, to some degree, from last week's parsha. At the end of last week's portion, Avram is commanded the mitzvah of bris, circumcision. We learned last week how Avram has a son named Ishmael, who fathers from a woman named Hagar. Hagar has Ishmael. Ishmael, at 13 years old, has a bris. At the same time, God tells him that in 1 year from now, you're going to have another son born to Sarah, who you'll name Yitzchak, and you'll circumcise him 8 days old. So then we go off on a little bit of a side road, and then we get back to the fulfillment of that promise. Sarah gives birth. On the 8th day, they give him a bris. They call him Yitzchak. So now you have in the home Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac is a young boy. He grows up. His brothers, half-brothers, 14 years older than he is. Okay? Anyone who has a sibling knows that siblings like to taunt each other. They like to mess with each other. And Ishmael certainly was doing things 14 years older than his sibling, certainly doing things around his brother that he shouldn't have been doing. And here's where we run into a problem. And I say this as a problem just from a layman's perspective. Why did Abraham marry Hagar? Why did he father a child from a woman, Hagar? Not from his own idea. It wasn't his idea. Sarah was the one that insisted. She said, you should take Hagar. Why did Sarah say this? Some learn simply, well, Hagar was their maidservant, and if she would have children, so then the children would belong to the master, to Avram and to Sarah. So that would be like their form of adoption, sort of. But there's a much deeper understanding here, and that is that Sarah wanted to demonstrate how badly she wanted children, to the point where she was even ready to say, take Hagar and father a child from Hagar, and hopefully God would see this and say, if she's ready to sacrifice so much, so I'll also give Sarah a child as well. When they grow up, Sarah notices that Yitzchak is being negatively influenced by his older brother. So let's look in your source sheet, source number 1. Okay? The Torah tells us in Genesis chapter 21, verse 9, Sarah sees the son of Hagar, the Egyptian woman, whom she had born to Abraham, doing what? Mitzachek. Translated here as making merry. No, what are you? You're a commentary. That's what it says in the verse. It says making merry. Mitzachek. So what does Sarah say? Vatomer LaAvram, she turns to Avram and she says, Goresh ha'omazois v'esbeno, drive out this maid and her son, ki lo yirash ben amazois ben Yitzchak, for this maid shall not inherit with my son with Isaac. Full stop. What does Sarah say? Throw them out. Ishmael is being a negative influence on Isaac. You got to get rid of Ishmael and his mother. Get the whole family. They all got to go. She is, to put it mildly, unhappy. She turns to her husband, the father of the boy, and she expresses her displeasure. Now, it doesn't say what Avram replied back to her, but it does say that Avram didn't listen right away. Avram was not ready to do this. And here's where you have disagreement. Avram is fine with the boy staying in the house. Sarah is not. The wife says, get out. The husband says he can stay. What happens next? You go to the rabbi. Rabbi, we have a problem. Right? Who do we listen to? In such a situation, do you listen to the father or the mother? So before we get to the answer, let's first see what the problem was. What does mitzachek mean? So Gary was very wise and learned. Gary says he was serving idols. So it's not so simple. Let's read source number 2. Darash Rabbi Kiva taught this in the Gemara Soita, the Sefta from Soita. And Sarah sees that he was making merry. It refers to idol worship. Sarah saw how Ishmael would build an altar, and he would trap grasshoppers. He would sacrifice them on the altar. In other words, he would build these small little makeshift altars, and he would capture little grasshoppers, and he would turn this into a whole religion. And Sarah says this is antithetical to everything we're teaching our young, precious, pure, and sincere Isaac. He's going to corrupt him with his perverted ideological ideas, and therefore get rid of him. That's what Rabbi Akiva taught in the name of, that was Rabbi Akiva taught. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Saglili, says, no, making merry here doesn't mean serving idols. Rather, it means illicit sexual relations. Sarah would witness how Ishmael would engage in illicit sexual behaviors. She saw him climbing over fences and abusing women. So he was what we would call in English today a rapist. I can't have such a guy. He's living with my son. Got to throw him out. Rabbi Ishmael says, the language tzechoik doesn't mean idol worship. It doesn't mean illicit sexual relations. What it means is murder. Sarah witnessed Ishmael shooting arrows in Isaac's direction, which what we call today is he's playing with guns around the house. He's taking out a gun and he's shooting bullets in the direction at my son. Get rid of this nutcase. He'll make one error and I'll blow my kid's head off, right? In those days, they had an arrow, bow and arrow. He's shooting arrows next to my son. I'm sorry, you can't have this guy. He's centimeters away from murder. Get rid of him. Obviously, if he's doing that to Ishmael, what was he doing to other people? So therefore, one of these three reasons, or all of them together, and Sarah had enough. This could not continue in her home, from her perspective. Obviously, Avram sees things differently, because Avram is not so ready and eager to throw him out. So God intervenes. What does God say? Vayera Adavram Oid, back in the Torah, Genesis. Vayera Adavram Oid Beinei Avram, source number 3. But the matter greatly displeased Avram on account of his son. Vayomer Elokim Avram, and God says to Avram, Al Yera Beinecha Al Anar Val Masecha. Don't be displeased concerning the lad and concerning your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her voice, for it is Isaac who will be called your descendant. And you're worried about the other one. But I will also make the son of your maid into a nation because he is your seed. So what does God say to Avram? What is God's intervention? What does God say to Avram? Listen to Sarah. So now let's analyze the words of God. Why do the words of God need analyzation over here? What's part of the story doesn't make sense? What's strange about God's intervention over here?
Well, he's saying Ishmael is also going to be a descendant in a nation.
Yeah, but that's in order to assuage Avram's fear. You're sending away my son. So God says, don't worry, we'll take care of him too. But in God's response to Avram, putting Ishmael on the side, just in regarding the case of Yitzchak, what's strange? Let's go back to the analogy that I gave you. Husband, wife get into an argument, right? They both can't come to an agreement. This one says, I want to have chicken for dinner, and this one says, I want to have roast beef for dinner. Terrible, causing chaos in the home. You go to the rabbi, you tell the rabbi, we have a problem. I say chicken, she says roast beef. So what does the rabbi, what does anyone answer? Tell me either chicken or roast beef. Deal with the situation, right? Instead, imagine the rabbi comes and says, I say chicken, she says roast beef, and the rabbi comes and says, whatever your wife tells you, you have to listen to her. Where do you get to whatever? How do you make this overgeneralization over here? We're talking about one specific story. This is one argument over here. It's Ishmael in the house or out of the house. We have a problem over here, one case. Don't tell me everything. Where'd that everything come from? What's this rule of thumb? Whatever your wife tells you, it's more than we bargained for over here. All we had a problem was with this case. Ishmael inside the house, or do you throw him out of the house? There's a negative influence on my child now. How severely do we have to take it? I'm more relaxed about it. My wife is more nervous about it. So just answer me in this case. Listen, in this situation, throw him out. How did that come to whatever Sarah tells you have to listen to? Really? Why does she get so much power? Why is God making this story bigger than her? You understand the question, right? So that's why I need exactly. We're talking about one specific case. We come to anyone, ask them for intervention in this case. What do you come to extend that further than just what we're talking about? I didn't ask you to get into other details of our marriage. All we're talking about is this detail of our marriage. If we have an issue over there, we'll come to you tomorrow. But we're not there. Now we're only over here. So if we stop here, we should understand that this must have not been the first disagreement between husband and wife in the history of mankind till Avram and Sarah. But it is the first one that's recorded. And if we're recording this story, it must be because there's a lesson in the story for each and every one of us, and for every husband and wife, and for every Jewish home. And that's why the story is recorded, and that's why God answers in the way he does. Because the answer is not just an answer to this particular case. It's an answer not only for Avram and Sarah, but it's an answer for every Jewish marriage for all future generations. So this is a very important story to understand and to get right. In order to understand what the lesson is for us, we have to understand, why did God tell Avram that everything your wife tells you, listen? I mean, why? I mean, the women surely like it. The wives surely will sign up for this any day of the week, but it's not fair for the men to give such power to the wife. Why do we find this? That maybe is even a bigger question. What's going on over here? How is it supposed to have, what do they say? It's the key to successful marriage is?
To teach wife, maybe.
That's not what the world says.
Yeah, well,
Compromise. We each have to compromise. God didn't say compromise. He didn't stop. God never said compromise with your wife. Didn't tell her compromise with your husband. It's actually the opposite of compromise over here. We don't believe.
Or even to talk it over.
Or even to talk it over. Okay. So in order to understand this, as I mentioned in the beginning, what we're really trying to get to over here is, how do we find proper roles for each of the energies that come into the home? In order to get to that, we have to go first travel, fast forward from the story of Avram and Sarah, the story of the Jewish people at the end of our journey in the desert. At the end of the journey in the desert, we know the famous story that God tells Moses to speak to the rock to produce water, and Moses strikes the rock, and Moses is punished. He can't go into the land of Israel. Why did the whole story come about? Where did this whole story come from? Speak to the rock. Because we needed water. What do you mean we needed water? This was after 40 years in the desert. What happened for the first 40 years? Where did you get water from? Where did the Jews drink water from in the desert? So the answer is that this story in the Torah appears right after the death of Miriam. Miriam dies, and the Jewish people don't have water. And from here we learn that it was in Miriam's merit that the Jewish people had what was called a traveling well, a miraculous traveling well that produced water for the Jewish people for 40 years in the desert. And when Miriam dies, the well stops producing water. Now we're stuck. Now, what happens? God says to Moses, speak to the rock. Moses strikes the rock. In other words, there's a whole new miracle that takes place. There was a miracle that lasted for 40 years, and that was called the Be'era Shel Miriam, the well of Miriam, because it was in Miriam's merit that the Jewish people had water. So let's jump to text number 5. Okay, source use text number 5. Rabbi Yossi says, this is from the Gemara and Tainus, a little bit of a bridge version. Rabbi Yossi says that there were 3 people who were providers for the Jewish people: Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And each one provided the Jewish people with something else, with the well, with the clouds of glory, and with the manna from heaven. Miriam was the provider of water. Aaron was the provider of the clouds. And the manna was in the merit of Moses. So when Miriam dies, the well dried up, but it returned in the merit of Moses and Aaron. After Aaron dies, the clouds of glory disappear, and then they return in the merit of Moses. Okay. So stop there. History, this is just basic history. It's clearly in the Chumash that the well stopped. The Gemara fills us in. Why is it mentioned right after the death of Miriam? Because the well was there in Miriam's merit. Miriam carried the Jewish people for 40 years. It was in her merit that God provided hydration for the Jewish people. Beautiful. Now, why was it in Miriam's merit that the Jewish people had water? What is the connection between Miriam and the well water? So let's read the words. We'll read in the English over here. The Torah relates how in the portion of Chukas, that Miriam died and the people had no water. The sages explained that for 40 years it was in the merit of Miriam. Right? Next paragraph. There's a very surprising point here that requires explanation. The sages teach that the manna came in Moses' merit, the clouds of glory in Aaron's merit, and the well of water was in Miriam's merit. Why is water specifically associated so closely with Miriam to the point that after her passing, a special divine command to speak to the rock and it will give water was needed in order to reinstate the well in Moses and Aaron's merit? In other words, you needed to have a whole other miracle over here. God needed to provide a whole other miracle over here for the Jewish people in order to reinstate the water. Something that was there, as a matter of fact, in Miriam's merit for 40 years. In order to understand this, we're going to understand what water does to the body. Okay? And then we'll understand, this will bring everything back into a good perspective over here. If I ask you why you need water, what would you tell me? Hydration. If you don't have water, what happens?
Everything.
Everything happens. Okay. So the Rambam teaches us over here something interesting. Remember, Maimonides was a grand physician, a master physician in his day. And Maimonides writes in his commentary in the Mishnah that water doesn't nourish the body like food does. However, what water does is it carries the food to the necessary places. What does he mean? Which means like this. People need water for hydration. Without water, we would die. There's no question about that. You will be parched and we wouldn't be able to survive, right? But there's a primary function of water that's in addition to that. And that is that water serves to soften the food and carry the blood through the body. If you don't drink, if you don't have water, what happens is the blood becomes too thick to be able to reach into the smallest of places, the smallest of veins in the body. And the blood can't reach to certain parts of the body because the blood is too thick. So what the water does is water softens and makes it thinner, it thins it out, and enables the blood now to go and travel everywhere in the body that the blood needs to get to. Even in the small veins, in the words of Maimonides. So if we were to just understand this from this teaching of Maimonides, we see how if a person eats without drinking, the blood can't circulate properly. Drinking is there to help circulate the blood to the entire body. And this is a very important thing to remember. Why? Because everything in the physical world has a spiritual counterpart. So what is the spiritual idea that measures up with this concept of the water being there to soften, to thin the blood in order to help it circulate to the entire body? So the physical phenomenon reflects a spiritual reality. And the spiritual reality reflects man's divine service. You're following in English. A person can contemplate a matter thoroughly in their mind and understand logically why they need to act in a certain way. And nevertheless, that understanding can fail to have a practical impact. It doesn't reach the small veins in the hands and feet, which means the person understands the matter logically and may even feel it in their heart, but it still does not reach their extremities, the fingers and the toes. And the heel of the foot, which is supposed to run for a mitzvah. We need to work on this to ensure that whatever task we are focusing on should not only be perfect in its natural place, but that it should also reach and influence all of our other elements. Our entire being needs to be fully aligned with the particular point regarding fulfilling God's will that we meditated on or developed emotions towards. What happens is occasionally, and sometimes sadly even more than occasionally, we have a good idea. Come to Torah class, right? Torah class. What did you learn in Torah class today? It was an amazing class. Amazing teaching. Really? Share it with me. Oh, I can share with you the whole idea. Fantastic. Wow. Intellectually, it's perfect. If we're lucky enough, we even get excited emotionally about it. It doesn't remain in the world of intellect, but it trickles down even to the level of emotions. We're even excited about it. We feel passionate about the idea. Okay. Now I ask you, what difference does this make to your life? I don't know. In other words, does it change my behavior? This which I study and I get excited about, does it impact my behavior or not? Many, many, many times we understand, we study, we're even excited about it, but it doesn't travel to our behavior. It doesn't trickle down to behavior. It remains in the world of intellect. It remains an emotional, beautiful masterpiece. But in my fingers and my toes, meaning in the world of action where I behave, in those parts of my body which are not considered to be the most sensitive. It's not my brain. It's not my heart. It's a finger, it's a toe, but those are the parts of the body that do things. Didn't make it yet. I'm not running to do a mitzvah when I finish Torah class. But why not? We should, in theory. We should jump at it out. Well, we have to run right away to do a mitzvah. It's brought down that the early Chassidim, it's brought down in not only Chassidim, but many people, after davening, what would they do? They would immediately go and study. If you daven properly, if you really felt a davening the way a davening is supposed to make you feel, what are you going to do? Go eat a bagel? What are you going to do? Go eat a steak? What are you going to do? You're going to go run to do work? How can you? You have to have like a time, a little bit of time to get back to reality. Do a little bit of a study. Go do something, an easy mitzvah to do in order to bridge the gap between the world of God and the physical reality. You can't just jump right in from one world to the other. If you didn't have an experiential davening, so then you can go right into it. It's not a problem. So in this context, what we're talking about over here, the food is there. The food is the intellect. The food is the idea. That's the food. But the food creates thick blood. And we have to have a drink. We have to have water in order to ensure that that intellect travels all the way to a person's feelings and travels further to a person's behavior as well. That's the role of water. That's the role of water, to bring that all the way down to the world of action. Everyone understand this? We're good? Okay. Now let's move back to the home. Let's bring this back to the home. How does this help us understand the home? Okay. Again, as I opened at the beginning, we're talking over here about a Jewish perspective for an ideal Jewish home, and this is the model of an ideal Jewish home. This is how it works. Two people get married. Why did they get married? They get married because they each view in each other that together we can, our goals for life are the same, and therefore we can achieve together that which we're both looking for. If our goals are not the same, if we have different goals in life, then it's going to be a disaster. I'm looking to achieve one thing, you're looking to achieve another thing. If you have a child, it's going to make it even a bigger disaster because we're going to each be tugging at the child and trying to get the child to a different place. So we're not going to talk about the problem side. We're going to talk about the ideal way it should be. So you have the conceptual ideas, and then you have the reality of life. The way it should work is that the husband's role in the family The man energy is the one that provides the goal, provides the output, provides the food. This is what we're looking to accomplish together. It's the woman, it's the wife who is much better suited to be like the water, to soften it, and to bring it to the places what we would call reality in life. To bring it from a place of concept to a place of reality. How does it play itself out in reality? Let's go back to Avram and Sarah for a moment. Avram and Sarah, we're going to assume, had a very nice marriage. No reason to think otherwise. Why not? They had a good marriage. For the most part, they loved each other and they had a beautiful marriage together. They would do everything together. They worked hard together in promoting the belief that Hashem Echad. Sarah did it from her way. Avram did it in his way. They were on a journey together. When they set up a home, they had the same ideas. That's why it worked. The marriage only worked because Sarah bought into Avraham's way of life. But now there was an issue. There was an issue with the Yitzchak. Yitzchak is born, now we have an issue. What's the issue of Yitzchak, with Yitzchak? Avram wants him to be negatively influenced? No, of course not. He's a fool. Both Avram and Sarah both don't want him to be negatively influenced. They both don't want him to become corrupt. Of course, that's obvious. So what's the disagreement over it? If you both want the same thing, what's the disagreement? Oh, how are we going to reach it? That's the question. What the goal is, what the result that we want is, of course that's the same. But what the debate over here is, how are we going to reach the goal? That's where God comes and says to Avram, whatever your wife tells you, listen to her. Your wife is the key to how to actually bring this into reality. To take the ideas, and when you have a question, how to implement, when it comes to implementing something that you both agree on, trust her instincts. Because like the water is needed to bring the blood into the smallest of veins in order for the body to remain a healthy body, so too it was Miriam, the Jewish woman, Miriam, in whose merit the Jewish people had water for 40 years. Water. Miriam represented water for 40 years in the desert because it's their ability to take that which is harsh, that which is hard, that which is an intellectual idea. It's only a concept. It's a goal, maybe. It's something that we're working on. And implement, bring it into the home. And see how it can fit into the different scenarios that life has for us. So let's read it inside. Page number 6. This is true regarding the personal divine service of every individual, and it's also true regarding the general structure of the home. There are responsibilities that are borne primarily by men and other responsibilities borne primarily by women. It is the man's responsibility to give a general directive that the conduct of the home, the education of the children, and the conduct of the entire family should be in accordance with the instructions of the Code of Jewish law. But translating this general directive into detailed instructions, determining the particulars of managing the house, educating the children, and the conduct of all the family members, so that even the smallest detail of life should reflect the truth of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that the husband recites in the morning, this depends primarily on the wife, who is the Akeres Habayis, the mainstay of the home. She's the anchor of the home. She is the one who implements this concept and applies it to the practical conduct of the home in all of its details. It's a special skill that Hashem gave in order to be able to guide the household along the path that the husband provides the direction of the path. And of course, again, we're talking about a husband and wife that want to fulfill the will of Hashem. They're both traveling. The husband lays down the path. This is the path that we're going to take. And then the wife is the one who takes over from there. She's the one that drives down the road. She takes everybody along with her. Therefore, God said to Avram, you should listen to your wife. You should listen to your wife. Miriam was an educator. The manna came from heaven in the merit of Moshe. Moshe provided the food. Miriam was the one who provided the water. Moses provided ideas, Torah concepts, divine concepts, beautiful concepts. That was all being shared by Moses, influencing the Jewish people. But you need to have the role of Miriam, the role of the water, to take that spiritual vitality of the manna, of the food, and spread it throughout the entire body to bring it into my daily service of Hashem. After Miriam's passing, a special miracle was required in order to bring the well back through Moses and Aaron. Now, people think the Jews are called the chosen people. So many times people don't like it. Oh, you think you're better. You think you're superior. What do they call it? You think you're a superior race. And you think you're a privileged people. You call yourself the chosen people. So what's the response? Do we think we're better than someone else? We call ourselves the chosen people? The answer is, if anyone asks you, anyone taunts you, or anyone mentions this to you, just respond to them and ask them if they would also like to be chosen for the same job that we were chosen for. And most likely, after they hear the details of what we were chosen for, they will politely decline. In other words, every zchus, every merit, from a Jewish perspective, every merit that we have is an achrayus, it's a responsibility. There's no such thing as having merit without responsibility. The chosen people has been chosen as a responsibility we were given. We have certain laws that we have to follow in order to live up to this chosen people. And a lot of them are very complicated, and a lot of them can be very taxing. And who would want such a thing? That's why when a convert comes, a non-Jew comes to convert to the Jewish people, we tell him, what do you need this for? What are you missing? What are you missing in life that you want this? You could live now a life where you don't have to keep kosher. You could live now a life where you don't have to observe Shabbos. You can live now a life you don't have to put on film. What are you missing? What do you want this for? And only if they insist do we continue. Because a lot of times they, from an outside perspective, wow, it's beauty of a beautiful community. You guys live a beautiful life. I also want to be part of it, so let me in. It's true. But when you realize how that comes with responsibilities, now you have to pay for it. I don't mean pay with money. You have to pay with a commitment, a life commitment. Oh, now that you mentioned that to me, yeah, you're right. I'd probably rather not. Probably like to remain where I am as a non-Jew. That would make a lot of sense. Anyone who wants to convert into Judaism doesn't make sense. It's not a rational thing. You got to be a meshugana to do such a thing. I don't mean meshugana in a derogatory way. I mean a meshugana, you're not thinking straight. And it's true. That's what we believe. Every non-Jew who converts, they were really born with a Jewish soul that was looking to express itself. It was something that transcends logic that pushed them to convert. Logically, no one would ever convert. It doesn't make. Why? Everyone should want to be a part of the chosen. Yeah, until you start reading, understanding what it is. So the same thing over here. God tells Avram, everything your wife tells you, listen. So women say, oh, you see, amazing. So fast. That means you're responsible now. It's a bit of responsibility. It's true. This is the reality. The reality is that husband and wife bring a different perspective into the marriage. Each one has a different role to play. We're with a badge of honor. It says, Sarah says whatever God said, whatever Sarah says, you should listen, Avram. Husband, you should listen to your wife. Yeah, but at the same time, it now becomes the wife's responsibility to implement, to carry this forward, to take the ideas, to sit in the driver's seat, to grab the wheel, and to steer the family in the right place. It's not just a position of respect and a title that we're giving you. It's a massive responsibility. As he writes, we must know that every Jewish woman has the duty and merit of bringing the divine light of the bread from heaven into every Jewish home, just like Miriam did for the entire Jewish people. She does so for her personal home, her neighbor's home, and even for the Jew on the other side of the world, because the Jewish people are a single entity and responsible for each other. The verse states regarding Miriam, all of the women followed her. This refers to all Jewish women in all generations. They all follow Miriam's path and emulate her actions, bringing the water of Miriam's well and carrying the bread from heaven into all elements of the Jewish home. Even the material elements of life will be without difficulties and concealment, and the money will be spent on healthy and positive matters, good for heaven and good for fellow humans, good causes that bear fruit. The above related events with the well of Miriam occurred during the 40th year of the Jewish people in the desert. That was the generation that entered the land of Israel as a preparation for their entry. In our time, we find ourselves in a similar situation, as we are the final generation of exile, and very soon the redemption will begin, and we'll enter into the land of Israel with strength, joy, and gladness. Okay, so what's the practical takeaway from all of this? It speaks for itself. Today's lesson speaks for itself. It's a very important lesson for everyone to know, and it extends further than just husband and wife, but if we take even one step out and zoom out, we have to understand that every time in life, wherever there's disagreements, there's two reasons for disagreements. One is unhealthy and one is a healthy. Unhealthy disagreement is where we have two different agendas. When we have two different agendas, the disagreements are nasty. That's an unhealthy disagreement, because we each have a personal agenda, and this is real conflict. This is what causes war. This is what brings about bloodshed, literally and also metaphorically speaking. But then there is a disagreement where we both have the same agenda. We're both rooting for the same team. We both have the same agenda. But there's a disagreement in how to implement the agenda. And that's what we're talking about today. And in general, whenever you find yourself in a disagreement, you should ask yourself, what type of disagreement is this? Is this a matter of we have different agendas? Or is this a matter of we have the same agenda, just two different ways of going about it? When it comes to a marriage, Hashem says that an ideal marriage, husband and wife should be like Avram and Sarah. They have the same agenda. The agenda was Avram's. Avram set down the agenda for the family. This is the type of home that we're going to have. This is the type of children I want to raise. This is the type of education I want to give my children. That was all the concept. That was all the idea. Comes along Sarah, and Sarah says, I'm going to be able to take that, and now we're going to implement it. This is what we have to do in this situation. You're going to come along and say, well, no, maybe we do it differently. Good. Well, we listen to Sarah, because she was blessed with a certain skill to be able to help navigate the circumstances of life from a better perspective. From a perspective of my role is to be like Miriam, to bring the teachings of Moshe and let it flow to the entire Jewish people. And that's why we listen to Miriam when it comes to navigating and determining the practical method of how best to implement and illuminate the home, and to guide the children, educate the children in the ways of Torah and mitzvahs, to fulfill the mutual agenda that we both, Avram and Sarah, both have. All right, anyone have any questions on today's lesson? No? Okay, beautiful then. Everyone have a beautiful evening. It's great to see you all. Next week, we're not going to have on Tuesday night.